At first glance, the tension between modern Israel and Iran appears to be a conflict of the 21st century. Many people point to Iran's nuclear ambitions, its support for groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and the strong rhetoric of political leaders who openly oppose Israel's existence. These headlines make the conflict look purely political and modern. However, when we look through the lens of the Bible, we see that the roots of this hostility go much deeper. The scriptures, written thousands of years ago, reveal that the struggle surrounding Israel did not begin in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution, or even in 1948 with the rebirth of the modern state of Israel. The Bible traces the origins of this tension back to a family story that began in the ancient desert. That story involves Abraham, his wife Sarah, her servant Hagar, and two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. The account begins in the book of Genesis when God calls Abraham and gives him a powerful promise. God tells him that he will become the father of a great nation, and that through his descendants all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Abraham believed God, but many years passed and he and Sarah remained childless. As time went on, they began to struggle with patience and trust in God's timing. In a moment of human reasoning, Sarah suggested that Abraham have a child through her servant Hagar, so that the promise might still be fulfilled through their household. Abraham agreed, and Hagar gave birth to Ishmael. This decision was a human attempt to solve a problem that God had already promised to resolve in his own time. Throughout Scripture, we see a pattern. When people try to accomplish God's promises through human effort alone, complicated consequences often follow. Years later, God fulfilled his original promise. Even though Sarah was 90 years old, she miraculously gave birth to a son named Isaac. His name means laughter, reflecting the joy and amazement of God's miraculous provision. Now there were two sons in Abraham's household, Ishmael, born through human planning, and Isaac, born through God's promise. As the boys grew, tension developed between them. During the celebration of Isaac's weaning, Ishmael mocked his younger brother. Sarah saw this and asked Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away. This deeply troubled Abraham, but God reassured him. God confirmed that Isaac would be the one through whom the covenant promise would continue. Yet God also made it clear that Ishmael would not be forgotten. The Lord promised to make Ishmael into a great nation as well. In the wilderness, when Hagar and Ishmael felt abandoned and desperate, God heard their cries and provided water for them. This moment reveals an important truth. God's blessing and care extended to Ishmael too. However, the separation left a wound that shaped generations. Isaac's descendants became the people of Israel, while Ishmael's descendants formed many of the tribes of the Arabian regions. The rivalry between these family lines became part of the history of the Middle East. The Bible also includes a prophecy about Ishmael's descendants, describing a life marked by struggle and conflict with surrounding peoples. Many interpreters see this as a description of the long and complex history that followed. For a brief moment in Genesis, we see a glimpse of peace. When Abraham died, both Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury their father. The brothers stood side by side in respect and unity. Yet the deeper tensions among their descendants continued through the centuries. So, where does Iran enter this biblical picture? Modern Iran occupies the territory of the ancient Persian Empire. Persia appears several times in the Bible, sometimes as a place where hostility towards the Jewish people emerged. One well-known example is found in the story of Esther. During the Persian Empire under King Ahasuerus, a man named Haman plotted to destroy the Jewish people throughout the kingdom. His hatred towards Mordecai eventually turned into a decree calling for the extermination of all Jews. According to the biblical account, Haman was connected to the lineage of Amalek, a nation that had attacked Israel shortly after the Exodus from Egypt.
the Amalekites targeted the weakest members of Israel, which Scripture strongly condemned. The plan to destroy the Jews in Persia ultimately failed. Through God's intervention and the courage of Queen Esther, the plot was reversed. Haman himself was punished, and the Jewish people were preserved. Another prophetic passage appears in the book of Ezekiel, where a future coalition of nations is described as coming against Israel in the last days. Among those nations mentioned is Persia. The prophecy explains that God himself will intervene in that final conflict, demonstrating his power and protecting his people. Interestingly, Persia was not always hostile towards Israel. One remarkable leader of the Persian Empire was Cyrus the Great. After the Jewish people had been taken into exile in Babylon, Cyrus issued a decree allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. Because of this act, Cyrus is honored in the Bible as a ruler used by God for his purposes. History then moved forward through many changes. Centuries later, Persia was conquered during the early expansion of Islam in the 7th century. Over time, the region developed the political and religious identity that eventually became modern Iran. Today, political tensions between Israel and Iran are shaped by complex historical, religious, and geopolitical factors. Some religious interpretations within parts of the region view the existence of Israel through an apocalyptic or end times lens, which contributes to the intensity of the conflict. Yet, the Bible does not leave the story in conflict. Scripture repeatedly points towards a future of reconciliation and redemption. In the book of Isaiah, there is a surprising prophecy describing a time when Egypt, Assyria, and Israel will worship God together and be blessed by him. The New Testament also speaks of a future restoration. In the writings of the Apostle Paul, we are told that God's plan for Israel and the nations is still unfolding, and that his mercy extends to all peoples. When we step back, the Bible presents the deeper conflict not simply as one between nations, but as a spiritual struggle between darkness and the purposes of God. Human history is full of wars, rivalries, and shifting alliances. Yet the message of Scripture reminds us that God's plan continues to move forward despite human conflict. Empires rise and fall, leaders change, and political tensions shift, but the hope of redemption that God promised through Abraham remains central to the biblical story. In the end, the message of the Bible is not simply about ancient rivalry. It is about God's faithfulness, his justice, and his promise that one day reconciliation and peace will replace hostility. And according to the Scriptures, that final chapter has already been written.